every day somebody tells me something really terrible that happened to them, and we have to work through that. But it's so worth it on the other end when you see the blessings that it can bring and how people can really thrive after cancer.
Welcome to Cancer Talks, a podcast sharing personal stories of transformation from people whose lives have been touched by cancer. My name is Claire DeLaslo, and I'll be guiding today's conversation. Our guest this week is Dr. Chris Holder, a naturopathic doctor who offers holistic integrative care. His practice combines Western medical technology with Eastern philosophy. Dr. Holder specializes in cancer and neurological disorders with an approach that centers self-discovery and patient empowerment.
Hi, Claire.
Hi, and welcome to Cancer Talks. So looking forward to our conversation today. Could you start by just introducing yourself and a little bit about why you decided to interview today?
Hi, my name is Dr. Chris Holder. I work at Wild Oak Medicine, and I specialize in integrative oncology, and I love talking about all things oncology.
Great. So I'm curious about your whole story with cancer, and maybe we could start with your earliest memory of cancer entering your life in some way.
Yeah, I grew up in a town called Pocatello, Idaho, and there were these boys that I used to play with, and they had a lovely mother named Angie Villano. And Angie was kind of like the group mother. She was the mother of all the kids in the neighborhood. She definitely carried that energy and was well loved by all the kids. And when we were pretty young, she got breast cancer and actually died pretty quickly within a few years after treatment. And that was the first time I had ever heard the word cancer, and it just seemed to me so unfair at the time that God would take such a lovely human being from us so early. And it kind of set me on a journey of wondering about that and learning a little bit more about the causes of cancer and some of the spiritual aspects of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love to get a slightly fuller picture of you, of your childhood and your early life, and how did you then get into oncology?
Yeah, I'll kind of give you an overview. I grew up in, like I said, in Pocatello, Idaho. I'm a son of immigrants from Guyana, that's down in South America. And my mother was an operating room nurse, and I got to scrub into Dr. Selznick's orthopedic surgery suite in my teens, which gave me a taste for medicine. With an East Indian mother, you have two choices, engineering or being a doctor. I like both, but I went the doctor route. I ended up getting into Seattle University, and so I moved to Seattle. And as a freshman, I was hired at Pacific Northwest Research Institute, where I worked on type 1 diabetes genes, specifically the HLA coding region for type 1 diabetes. And the other thing that the lab worked on in the building was cancer. Lots of experiments were being done in the building on cancer. And we would often swap technical know-how, especially with the Hellstrom lab. Carl, Eric, and Ingegerd Hellstrom, they're a husband and wife team that's been in cancer research for probably 6 decades now. Very well respected and well published there. And I knew pretty early on diabetes wasn't my main interest. I got more interested in cancer, looking at the work that was going on around me. And through a funny set of circumstances, I got sick on a trip to India and stumbled across a naturopathic doctor's office and ended up having a visit. And that visit sort of changed my life and set me on a different path. At the time, I was looking at going to MD school, probably University of Washington. But it bothered me that the naturopathic doctors were the ones that I felt really helped me in my time of illness.
Mm-hmm.
And so very late in the game, I put in an application to Bastyr University, which is also in Seattle. And they were a little confused in my interview. They asked me, why not go be an MD? You already, gotten into that system. And so I told them my story and how I was intrigued at using, diet and lifestyle and herbs and supplements as treatments to amplify health, that I was more interested in that than prescribing drugs.
And what was your story? If you are comfortable sharing, what had happened to you?
Yeah, I spent a quarter working with the Sisters of Charity, Mother Teresa's group in Calcutta, and got a multi-drug resistant lung infection
Oh.
that at the time I thought was tuberculosis because it's pretty
Mm-hmm.
rampant there. And so it took me many months to recover from that. I'd lost about 25 pounds
Well,
and was quite sick. I ended up seeing many doctors, including University of Washington's virology department, who's great and world renowned. And they basically said, we think you got a virus, but it's not any of the usual suspects. And we can put you on a HIV med if you like. And I said no.
well.
And it was at that point that I talked to the naturopathic doctor, and she did some acupuncture. She talked to me at length about my diet and gave me some herbs that would help boost my immune system and vitamins, and advised me to quit binge drinking in college. And and I got better pretty quick after that.
What did your mom think about shifting over to the naturopathic route?
Oh, it's almost a sore subject to this day, but
Oh, well, no
at the
pressure.
I think at the time she was really confused why I didn't take the safe way out, go to conventional medical school, go be a surgeon, make lots of money. I was very much groomed in that pathway.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me that I still love surgery. I love scrubbing in. I think it's a valuable part of medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a small piece of me that's still part surgeon.
You shared with me another aspect of your trip to Calcutta. Can you tell us where you were working and how that affected you, what you learned from that experience?
Yeah, initially I worked at the Home for the Dying, which is kind of the home that Mother Teresa was most famous for. She made a center where people wouldn't have to die in the street. They could die while being cared for. And then she later opened up several homes for people that are ill but not dying. And I worked in those for about 2 months as well. And so at the age of 20, I was learning about death and that it's a normal part of life and that infections go through populations.
Hmm.
And it was learning in a way that no book learning could have done, that hands-on, being in the thick of it. And so many funny stories about things the nuns would have us do.
Oh my God. You want
Yeah.
to share one?
Yeah, they're a force of nature. Probably one of the most memorable ones was this guy had this huge gaping wound in his leg, and it was monsoon season, which meant you're walking in knee-deep water with lots of feces. And so this guy's leg was incredibly infected. And it got to the point where they either needed to amputate his leg or do some real severe debridement and cleaning. And I wasn't a doctor back then. I was 20. I was, a sophomore in college. But I'm telling the nun, hey, we need to get a doctor in here. We need to have this guy's leg scraped out. It needs to be irrigated. And she starts asking me all these questions. Well, what would they need? Oh, you need iodine. You need a scalpel. You need this and that. The next day I show up, she's got everything ready for me. And I said, are you crazy? I'm not a doctor. A doctor needs to do this. And she just looked at me and said, if you don't do it, it won't get done.
Wow.
So you do it.
Oh my
And
God.
so this Swedish guy held him down because we didn't have any anesthesia. And I scrubbed this guy's leg out and took care of it for the next 2 months. And as far as I know, he kept his leg.
Whoa.
But basically the nun, she wasn't going to take no for an answer. We kind of fought about it for about 2 hours, and then I just did it.
Something you said made me think of this COVID-19 that we're all in the middle of. And I wonder about that perspective of infections running, or is that the word you used? But things running through populations as a natural part of life. Can you say anything about that and where we are now?
Yeah, in a way, I'm surprised it hasn't happened sooner. And I think a lot of experts on the subject are surprised that a global pandemic hasn't happened with the amount of global travel that we have.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect of it. I think in a way I've been very relaxed about the whole thing, probably due to my time in India.
Totally.
We had people with polio in the clinics that I was working in. people
Yeah.
with tuberculosis, HIV, of course. So I've been working with worse viruses from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good perspective to have. So maybe we could jump forward into more about your current practice with cancer patients. I have so many questions, but one thing you said to me really stuck with me, which your words from the call the other day were, the system can kill you if you don't have an advocate.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm thinking about your role in advocacy, but also maybe curious to hear a story, obviously anonymous anecdote of one of your patients, and how advocacy played in their journey.
Yeah, that's a great topic. What I meant when I said that is there's this sort of scenario in medicine that we kind of think of things as black and white, maybe from watching doctoring shows. Dr. House always seems to know the black and white answer, and things turn out well or they don't. If you take a cancer patient and put them in a room and line up 10 oncologists, you'll probably get at least 8 different opinions about what to do. And some cases are pretty straightforward, and you might have all 10 doctors agreeing, but many times not so much, because there's always some aspect of any given case that's a little off or a little different that we need to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the ways the system fails is that we fail to study everything equally, and we fail to tell people what is available. We'll tend to tell people what's available in our particular institution and not necessarily what Stanford's doing or Johns Hopkins or somewhere else. And that becomes a real issue if you have something rare and odd. And so if you're probably the biggest example that we get locally is the Kaiser system, will only tell you what's available in Kaiser's system. It can be very hard to get transferred out to see somebody at Stanford or to see the best person at MD Anderson. These are all big cancer centers that work with more rarer cases. And so sometimes that's a part of the work that I do is I look at somebody's case and I give them another opinion and sometimes connect them with another institution. 2 cases kind of jump out. One was a woman from Marin. She was interesting because she told me, I always ask all my patients, why did you get cancer? And she launched into this long story about how a prominent billionaire that lived next door to her had mold in his house and was renovating his house, and this mold was going into her house.
Whoa.
And she just sounded nuts at the time, but I always listen to my patients. So I said, let's run a mold panel. So I ran a toxicology panel looking at industrial toxins as well as many of the common mold toxins that can cause cancer. And sure enough, it came back off the charts high with aflatoxin,
Wow.
way higher than you could get from a food exposure. And so when she came back in for her follow-up, I said, oh, this is really interesting because you were right. And I told her, you sounded crazy to
Wow.
me. And
Yeah.
like you wanted to sue. I'm not going to say the person's name,
Yeah.
for no good reason.
Uh-huh.
And she basically was coming to me not for the mold treatment, but she wanted another option because she didn't want to have a J pouch. And a J pouch is when she had rectal cancer, so they would be cutting out part of her rectum and then putting it through a hole in her abdomen where she would
Whoa.
then poop in a bag for the rest of her life.
Whoa.
And so she had seen all the top people at UCSF and Stanford and came to me asking if I knew of any other option. So by the time she came back to me, I said, I don't know of any other options that aren't really surgery, chemo, or radiation.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this thing called proton beam that is available at Scripps, which is still radiation, but they're able to collate the beam so tightly within, millimeters of the tumor that you don't get scatter of radiation, so you get very little burning of the tissue around.
Wow.
It's very superior. So she was my first patient that, as the natural doctor, I'm telling her, go get this cutting edge thing that's not really
Yeah.
available at the time. So she went down to Scripps and did it. And when she came back, I was checking out the radiation site and I was blown away because normally when somebody gets radiation, it's like a very bad sunburn everywhere around
Yeah.
the whole tumor bed. It inflames it. You're in pain. There's all kinds of issue. With her, all I could see was this 1 millimeter of red line of scatter around the tumor.
Wow.
And I was amazed. And so she was my first proton beam patient. I've sent many more down to Southern California for this treatment now.
Do you end up having direct relationships with those doctors, or like how do you navigate, if you're kind of positioning yourself as helping someone look at all the options, and what do those interactions look like between practitioners?
It varies depending on what it is. I stay up to date in the research literature, so when I see promising treatments for things, I stay up to date on it. Occasionally, I'll email the researcher or the doctor. I do call them sometimes and ask my own questions if it's new and unclear to me. And some of them I have really good rapport with. Like I love an oncologist down at UCSF, Melanie Majur. She's really great at working on a case integratively.
Mm-hmm. Hearing about recommending cutting edge treatment and this woman who happened to have, the means makes me think about how money plays into treatment, and there's advocacy of exploring the options. And even before advocacy, like I think of what family, friends, people you don't have to pay can do in the realm of advocacy, if you're working in limited means.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it can be very tricky. We have a saying in our clinic. I always say we treat the richest of the richest and the poorest of the poor and everyone in between. And I do my best to treat everyone the same, and I tell them that at the beginning of the first visit, that I'm always going to tell you everything I know and not make the assumption that you can or can't afford it, or that you're researched in some ways or not others. I've been amazed to see people that are totally poor figure out how to finance cutting edge treatment. I've had rich people pay for other people's treatments every so often. Somebody's like, I want to pass it down, and so they sponsor somebody. I always think of that as, that's a spiritual thing that's between that person, and that my job is to tell them all the best options, even if it's in Germany, even if it's,
Yeah.
at a very expensive institution, because sometimes those institutions take on cases. Many times if it's very rare, like if you have a really rare disorder and somebody's researching it, I contact that researcher and we figure out a way to get them through the system, which can sometimes be paperwork hell, as you imagine.
Yeah. Something that you sort of touched on, like having those specific conventional doctors who you trust. We were talking a little bit about medical trauma, and
Yeah.
yeah, some people come to you because they've had painful experiences in a different system, and also painful experiences with doctors in general. How do you help people navigate that trauma?
Yeah. Let me lay out a few things first so it'll make a
Mm-hmm.
little more sense. My clinic is in Santa Rosa, California, so we're in Northern California. And I would say probably 75% of our patients come in doing conventional treatment and want integrative care as well. And so that's the vast majority of my practice is doing both. And then I'd say there's about 25% of people that walk through our door saying, I don't want to do anything conventional. And I'll ask why. And usually the answer falls into one of two categories. Category one is, I saw my mother, my father, my grandfather, some loved one die a horrible death in the conventional system. I don't want to have anything to do with being burned and poisoned. And then the other category is people that just completely distrust the system. They distrust big pharma. They
Mm-hmm.
distrust the insurance game.
Yeah.
Some of those people may be living out in the middle of nowhere in Mendocino.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a number of them wander into our clinic with some of the largest tumors I've ever seen because they don't treat them, or they treat them in ways that are not effective. And I'm usually the first one to, because I'm an alternative medicine doctor, they want an alternative treatment. Many times I end up talking them into conventional treatment, or at least walking them through the options and what that technically looks like, and then trying to match them with some skilled medical doctors that will be able to work with the distrust of the system. And in some cases, they have to run everything by me because the patient trusts me.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I'm kind of the middle broker for a lot of those deals.
How do you help someone take those steps of moving toward a place of trust or
Well, I think it's being trustworthy,
yeah.
taking the time to listen to them
Mm-hmm.
and their concerns and how they got those concerns and understanding their belief system. And then I ask questions. And I am somebody who I'm willing to treat even if they don't do anything. If they choose not to do anything conventional, I still tell them the rule is I'm always going to tell you what I think is
Mm-hmm.
best for your case. even if it's, in conflict with a belief system. I'll always say that, but I'll also always treat. The rules in the state of California is you do have to have an oncologist, and so I do require them to have seen an oncologist.
Yeah.
My patients that have passed when I think that they shouldn't have is usually because of a belief system. And I would say don't let a belief system limit your time on the planet.
Could you define belief system?
I think a lot of patients that fall into that category, I rarely lose somebody with just kind of a bread and butter case. But when I do, it's usually because they're not willing to use the tools that would probably work best. So sometimes it's surgery, sometimes it's chemo, sometimes it's proton beam.
Can I ask a big question?
Yeah.
How would you say cancer has changed you, maybe on a more personal or spiritual level?
The blessing and curse of cancer is there's this lingering death over your shoulder
Yeah.
of this could be lethal if we don't make the right moves. I love it because it makes people be real. We have conversations that they wouldn't otherwise have. We go places that they wouldn't otherwise. And so I like that authenticity and that realness. It can definitely be hard on some days. Every day somebody tells me something really terrible that happened to them, and we have to work through that. But it's so worth it on the other end when you see the blessings that it can bring and how people can really thrive after cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really brought a lot of thriving physically, mentally, and spiritually for me going through that journey without having cancer. And helping people
Yeah.
with that journey every day makes me really enjoy the simple things, the sunrises, my baby, my wife. Life is beautiful. And we forget how beautiful it can be until our mortality is in front of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I couldn't get there without those early lessons on death that I had in India,
Yeah.
and without facing my own mortality, which is a big part of indigenous healing. Many initiation rites for indigenous peoples involve getting you very close to death and then bringing you back.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's the way they train healers.
I've never heard it described that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little different than learning in a book.
I mean, so beautiful that you can focus on that aspect of it and it as a gift. And I also think about the weight that you hold in constantly dealing with that. And do you have some practices that you do for yourself to deal with that?
Yeah. It's required because the emotional charge of this work will take a toll on you if you don't have ways of discharging it.
Mm-hmm.
I have so many practices. I think the first thing that I probably do, though, just in between patients, if somebody told me something loaded, I have a quick little meditation while I'm washing hands between patients where I kind of run a beam of energy through my body while the water's washing over my hands, and I just kind of imagine the words in the story that they told me, or the charged energy or the trauma that they told me about washing through and out of my body, so that I'm not bringing that same energy into the next interaction with the next patient. So it's
Wow.
kind of my quick reset.
Yeah.
Then after work, I try to do a little bit of light body work. I might smudge myself. I might take a bath in Epsom salts. I do a lot of body work, acupuncture, chiropractor, massage for self-care. And then once a year, I do some sort of deep spiritual journey. That might be a vision quest on some years. I've sundanced with the Lakotas. I like Sesshin, long Zen meditation, 10 days of silence, where I kind of try to do a yearly check-in and reset.
Beautiful. And thinking also about this presence of death in your practice. You were describing yourself as a death doula, that as one of the roles you play.
Sometimes. Most of the
Sometimes.
time we try to get our patients to live, but
Yeah.
um,
Right.
there's this one case that totally makes me smile. This grandmother in her 80s was brought to me, and she had all her kids and some of her grandkids in my tiny little office filling up the
Wow.
place.
Oh.
And as I was talking, doing my usual thing, I could tell she was just not even listening to me. She just could care less. And so I threw everyone out of the room but her, and I said, "Do you have anything you want to live for?" And she says, "No, I'm old. I've seen all my grandkids. I'm in pain. I'm ready to die."
Hmm.
And I said, "I might be the one doctor that's okay with that. How do you want to die?" And then we brought the family back in the room, and I said, "No matter what I do, she's going to die, and she's ready to die. She wants a good death with you guys understanding." So she doesn't want heroics. She doesn't want me to find the best doctor in Timbuktu to come save her.
Wow.
She doesn't want to be saved, and she doesn't need to be saved. And so we brokered with the family what a good death looks like. And she was so happy because she cried because she was like, it was so much pressure to live for the family.
Hmm.
And she was old and ready to go, you know?
Wow.
So sometimes it's okay to die, and sometimes we figure out how to make people most comfortable, how to make sure undone business is done, who do we need to reconcile with, who do we need to forgive, what last healing needs to be done so that we can feel complete. Yeah.
Yeah. And all of those questions remind me also of some questions you ask in the beginning when you're first meeting someone, which is interesting.
Yeah, I always ask why. Why did you get cancer? Why did you get this illness? And then we always, I kind of do this thing where I draw their life on a timeline and show that you have a birth and you have a present moment. And at some point down this line, no matter what we do, there's a death. And in the first visit with a cancer patient, I almost always I want to address the death piece because I don't want them fearing it. I don't want fear clouding our judgment of the things we choose.
Mm-hmm.
And so oftentimes in that first visit, we go deep into all the fears around that, what that can look like or not look like. How will I know when I'm dying? Many patients with cancer in their body are not dying. And sometimes I have to show them via labs and imaging and medical
Yeah.
testing that you're actually not dying, and here's when you would be dying,
Yes.
so that we can get that off the plate and say, let's live.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a theme that has resurfaced in a lot of our interviews and our community gatherings also of how to decouple cancer and death. They're not the same thing.
Right. And depending on the cancer, some of these cancers are highly survivable
Yeah.
as long as you do something, as long as you change. And so I
Hmm.
try to help the people understand the factors that need to change, the factors that might have damaged their DNA, the factors that are suppressing their immune system, growth factors like inflammation, insulin, hormones, so that we don't get it back. I always tell people I like to be a one and done, meaning we treat this once and that you understand how we got here and what to do to prevent it from coming back.
Is it putting you on the spot to ask for a patient's story where you saw that change happen?
Which change?
Like where you were able to understand where the cancer was coming from and then that person was able to shift. I mean, I'm sure it happens all the time, but I'd love to hear a story of
Yeah,
change or transformation and
I have a lot of breast cancer patients. I did my residency with Leanna Standish in Seattle, Washington, and she's a cancer expert, but most of our patients had breast cancer. And so many of those women, when I ask them why, there's some story of trauma and often sexual trauma. And it's not that the trauma causes the cancer, but it's all the weird things that we do to cope. So the baseline high cortisol when they're around men, if a man was the perpetrator, and suppress the immune system. The stress of not feeling right in relationships or with their sexual life. Sometimes that trauma led to a schism between them and their spiritual life. So that's often what people tell me. And it bears out in the research as well. The conventional system just teaches you, here's how we're going to kill the cells. We're going to cut them out, we're going to radiate them, and we're going to chemo them. They don't do much in terms of talking to the patient about how did we get here. And I think it comes back too often when we don't teach patients that. They're back in the office 5 years later with a recurrence. And the conventional system is very good at killing those cells. We're just not good at preventing them from going cancerous in the first place.
I'd love to hear about your work, speaking of breast cancer patients, with the Bay Area Breast Health Collective. What is that, and what are you doing?
That's a loose group of a few of us that do all things breast health in the area. It was started by myself and a thermographer named Renee Russo, who runs the Santa Rosa Thermography Center, and a few other practitioners that work in the realm. And we often share patients to get kind of that full aspect. And each of us takes a different part of the education process. Prior to COVID, we also would rent medium-sized venues and give talks to the community, sometimes to breast cancer survivors, sometimes just to the lay public, anyone who's interested, and talk to them about these factors that what we find in people is plastics and pesticides and herbicides and fuels, and that these are the things that cause cancer from a Western standpoint of cell biology. Something has to get in there and damage that DNA. So we talk to them about how that gets in there, how you can test for it, how to get it back out, and ultimately how to prevent it from getting in the first place.
I love the perspective of doctors as educators. It's a really inspiring
Yeah.
role to take on. Yeah.
It's kind of a unique piece about naturopathic doctors is that we're really taught to be educators and that you empower the patient by teaching them about health and empowering them to make their own decisions. And I think for me with cancer patients, I help them make those decisions without fear. Fear is a tool that can be used to make somebody make poor quality decisions in all aspects of healthcare and especially with cancer care. Sometimes they're so scared of this diagnosis that the first treatment that they're told about, they just jump into it without regard to the costs and the consequences and what else may be out there. And sometimes the consequences can be life-changing because some of these treatments are not without cost.
What do you think broadly is missing from the mainstream cancer conversation or narrative?
Probably that industrial toxins cause cancer and that we should probably be testing every cancer patient. I do in my clinic. And then educating them about how the jet fuel got into them or how the automotive fuel got into them or this type of plastic or that type of plastic. And it's really kind of baked into my mind because the first 5 years of my career I worked in a cancer lab where they were giving rats and cell cultures cancer-causing toxins all day long, radiation, viruses.
Right.
And that's how we learned about these cancerous processes. I found it weird to become a clinician and find that that's not done. And there's studies, but it's not the normal thing that's done with the average cancer patient.
What do you see as the main prohibitors there? Like, why isn't that happening?
I think it's really loaded from so many aspects. You definitely see it in countries with socialized medicine. There's far more things banned in terms of what is allowed in food or what's allowed in cosmetics over in Europe versus here. Because once they see convincing evidence that such and such chemical in your lipstick causes cancer, they ban it because at the end of the day, the government's going to be paying the bill. So there's a vested interest to save the collective money in that way. That doesn't really exist here. You can create new molecules and put them in the environment, and 20 years later we'll tell you it's got some sort of bad health effect and try to remove it from the market.
Right.
But by then it's too late and the damage is done. I like practicing in California because we have strong environmental regulations. I have a love-hate relationship with Prop 65. That's that thing that puts a warning on everything that this causes cancer.
Oh, right.
But it doesn't quite go far enough in terms of the education part. So you walk into a car rental place and it has this big Prop 65 warning. Well, what about it?
Inducing a lot of fear. And
Yeah,
that's kind of
without
how I receive it. Is like, oh, like it's everywhere.
yeah. And it kind of desensitizes people to, oh, well,
Awesome.
there's
Yeah.
cancer-causing things everywhere, which is somewhat true. I think we can do better. I think there's ways to package our food in things that don't cause cancer. I think that we've had the technology for a long time to make all the cars electric so that we don't need fuel. We've had the technology for a long time to at least in California, solar power everything so that we're not burning coal and damming rivers and doing other things like that that also promote cancer. So yeah, I guess in my head I live in a different world where corporations and companies do the right thing because it's the right thing and also because it's a better profit line to do so. I don't like it necessarily having the government regulate everything to death, although sometimes with some industries it's not going to happen without that.
Well, at least as a consumer, think like seeing the this causes cancer known to the state of California.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does instill fear in me, but then I can try to remember there's such a difference between this can be a cancer causing toxin and you're going to get cancer if you hold this in your hand. But it's hard to, just in the same way that it's hard to receive a cancer diagnosis and know that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to die. It's hard to see X is cancerous, and there's no one-to-one. It doesn't really mean anything for a particular person.
Yeah.
Their interaction with that thing and whether they'll end up having cancer is so complicated.
It's true. And I would say in the vast majority of my cases, when I'm doing toxicology testing, I'm not finding one carcinogen that's high. I'm usually finding anywhere from a minimum of 4 and oftentimes 10 things that are very, very high. And so, how do you blame it on just the glyphosate or just the plastic? There does seem to be a synergy that's happening among these chemicals. And sometimes that's sometimes why it doesn't pan out when we might give a rat in a study one chemical in a high level and it doesn't cause cancer. But if we give them that chemical and another chemical together, it does.
Wow.
But the two chemicals by themselves may not.
And on the other side, is it true that two people in the same exact toxic environment, right, can have different levels of...
Exactly. There's kind of two portions to this. So we're talking about genetics here. You can inherit some cancer-causing genes like the BRCA1 and 2 gene. But even with those genes, you still have to have other genes get damaged and mutated to get cancer. So there still is this environmental piece in all cancer cases. And that's correct. People have different abilities to detox the same chemical, even within the same family.
Well, is there anything, I just want to give you a little space, if there's anything you want to share or add, or any questions you want to ask?
I think what I love about what we do is we pick up all the pieces that is left out in the conventional system, including, there is a spiritual journey to a cancer diagnosis, and some people need a lot of help on that journey because they maybe have been wounded by religion or abused by somebody that was a so-called spiritual somebody or a guru or something like that. And if they've been traumatized in that way, they can really have a block to being able to access the divine personally. And sometimes that's a big piece of what we end up working on. So I just wanted to bring that up to kind of flesh out all the aspects.
Mm-hmm.
I always tell people I'm not after religion. Religion is rules and culture. I'm after connection to that which is bigger than us, however you conceive of it. I had one patient, for him it was surfing. I asked him that question, and he says, "Oh, I get that. I feel connected when I surf." And I said, "I get that, which means you need to surf. Surfers need to surf."
Yeah.
And that was a big part of his coming back because he just thought with his illness, well, I can't surf anymore. And I said, who told you that?
Wow.
You know?
Yeah, that's a good example and a great question. But how do you help people or guide people toward understanding the spiritual work they have to do, I guess, as part of their cancer journey?
Ask them questions and listen. And then in some cases, I'm connecting them to everything from Catholic priests to ayahuasca shamans, Buddhist monks, Zen monks, Lakota shamans, anyone within my network. And then sometimes I'm reaching out to people outside my network if something comes up. Because I do think that whatever they're sort of attracted to or have an idea of, that's where we should probably go first. And so I've learned over the years to take my agenda out. Zen Buddhism might have helped me in that realm, and I can relate to that patient, but it doesn't mean Zen Buddhism is the right thing for them. And then sometimes I give them a swift kick in the pants and say, just try it.
Yeah.
Just try
Right.
it once. If you don't like it, um, we'll find something else. I had one patient, this sweet old lady who I was taking her pulses like an acupuncturist would, and she was very calm on the outside and angry storm on the inside. And I said, whoa, there's a lot of anger here. Which at first she denied. She's like, I'm not angry. And then a few minutes later, she's like, you're right, I'm angry. And I said, how do you normally process that anger? How do you get it out of you? And she says, well, I meditate. And I said, how's that working for you? And she smiled and said, not very well. And I said, what I think we should do, we need to try something 180 degrees from who you are normally. You're presenting to me as this calm person on the outside, but I need this rage on the inside to come out and be out of you because it's causing disease. And she said, what do you think I should do? And just kind of like, I didn't even think about it, just off the cuff, I said, I think you should go to their gun range and shoot a gun and scream. Because there's the only thing I could think of that was the exact opposite to this lady. And she gave me this look like, you're crazy. And I said, something like that, something that you wouldn't normally do because what's inside of you is not being worked on in the normal way that you do it. So she asked me again, well, what do you think I should do? And I just said, go to the gun range and shoot a gun and scream. Nobody will think it's weird. It's so loud in there. So she said, okay. She comes back and she said, well, I'm not ready to join the NRA, but I get why people like shooting guns. And I said, did it get the anger out of you? And she said it did. And I said, this is just another tool. I don't want you to go shoot somebody every time you feel angry. But if the meditation piece is not working, you might need to do something physical like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've shot guns with patients. I've shot bows. I've jumped out of airplanes. You name it. I'm willing to try anything that makes sense in their case.
Yeah, that idea of the 180, I mean, you're telling stories of how you guide people toward or suggest the 180,
Mm-hmm.
but it also makes me think of the cancer diagnosis as it can often catalyze like just a total world upside down. And
Yeah. Sometimes with a cancer diagnosis, we have a willingness to look at our life as we know it has to change. Change has to happen for us to stay on the planet. And so I have this opportunity to get people to try things that are outside of their realm. And sometimes it's not the right thing, but at least we tried it, you
yeah,
know. And then sometimes it's very deeply healing because it's a part of themselves that they've never allowed to be expressed. Because nice girls don't scream and shoot guns, or nice girls don't violently beat up their attacker. I've sent some women in for self-defense classes
yeah,
if they feel like that would be something healing for them, to beat the shit out of a guy in a padded suit. It works.
yeah. Yeah, and that idea of the 180 as specific to the person, right? Like the meditation example is so good because it's not,
Mm-hmm.
meditation is a great idea for lots of people, you know, but being able to identify what the norm is, like the norm in which cancer was created in the body, and what is the opposite, or what is the change for that person, which just has to be individual.
Yeah. What's the expression that's not happening that needs to happen
Yeah.
to heal? Yeah. So sometimes I'm the person that gives the person permission to die. Sometimes I'm the one that gives them permission to throw a fit,
Mm-hmm.
break some plates,
Mm-hmm.
and then clean up our mess and be done with it and never go back to that way of being. So we make a ceremony out of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I find indigenous ceremonies to be powerful, and then, sometimes we just make up the ceremony because a ceremony is words that are spoken and written, an action, witnesses, and gifting. Those are the four components to any ceremony, whether it's a wedding,
Huh.
a birth.
Yeah.
And so I'll often guide patients to that, when we find there's something deep that needs to be healed. Okay, we need a ceremony. I need you to express very clearly with words what you want to heal, and then we're going to do a symbolic action. We're going to break plates. We're going to shoot a gun. We're going to throw potatoes into the ocean. We're going to pour milk into a river. We're going to, whatever it is that makes sense metaphorically for that patient to catalyze this internal transformation, to really let go of that baggage that they're carrying. and they've been caring for so long.
Yeah, permission sticks with me.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving people permission. It's important work.
Yeah, and it's important to know. I always tell people this has nothing to do with me. Um, This is God's work. You know, whatever your concept of God or the divine, that's really what heals. I try to be a good catalyst for that, and I get in the way sometimes too. Because sometimes my ego gets big and I say, I know what's right for this patient, and I have to peel it back. The patient knows what's right for them, and we explore as many options as they're willing to explore to get to this nebulous thing, healing.
Yeah.
It's so hard to explain, what is healing. It's not that the body survives. No matter what, our bodies will die. But it's that feeling of contentment with what happened, and that all undone business is done by the time we cross over.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a review in your podcast app. Cancer Talks is a platform for anyone who has been touched by cancer. Go to cancertalks.com/mystory to join the conversation. If you're moved to donate, please visit patreon.com/cancertalks. This podcast was produced by me, Annie Mernigan, and Cheryl Buck, with editing and original music by Annie Mernigan. As always, a special thanks to our donors, friends, and volunteers. We couldn't do this without you.